Welcome back to Whistle Where You Work, where we're with the insider, Dr. Jeffrey Wigand, the man who blew the whistle on the cigarette industry and changed the face of America. Dr. Wigand, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Tell me where you grew up.
Grew up in New York City. I grew up in a borough of the Bronx. Went to school in the Bronx for most of my formative years, and then started college.
Where'd you do that?
I started off at a community college to begin with. I had a very low draft number, and after a year in college, I decided I was actually pursuing a medical career. I wanted to go into medicine, and at the same time, I also worked in the operating room of local Vassar Brothers Hospital. So I kind of knew where I wanted to go. My number was under 100.
Mine too.
And I was somewhat concerned that I was going to get pulled into the Army, and I knew if I pre-qualified that I could get A, into the Air Force, and B, I could get into the medical. So I was a paramedic. I ran a base hospital for the flight surgeon's office overseas in Japan, and did some tours through Southeast Asia. How's that?
All right. And when you got out of the military service, you went to work for several major pharmaceutical companies?
No, actually, I got out of the service, and I went back to school with the intent of becoming an orthopedic surgeon. That's exactly what I wanted to do. I became an NSF fellow.
National Science Foundation.
I'm sorry, National Science Foundation fellow in chemistry, which allowed me to do research as an undergraduate. And so I actually did a thesis, so I was in an honors program in chemistry, which also gave me money. I shouldn't say that, but it gave me some tremendous experience. I then went over to the School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences.
Where is this?
This is at State University of New York at Buffalo. At that time, it was called University of Buffalo. So it kind of transitioned while I was there. Mm-hmm. And I did my first research on vitamin B12. And then I somewhat got into a MD PhD program and got really interested in the whole area of endocrinology. And there were people that were working both at Roswell Park and at Children's Hospital. And I just sort of got hooked into it. Mm-hmm. Really found that medicine kind of really was memory work, where this was actually discovery work, and it really attracted me, and I pursued it. And so I got my master's in biochemistry from them, in actually vitamin B12, and then I got my doctorate in endocrinology and biochemistry from the School of Medicine. And then I went on and did 2 fellowships, and then I went to work, because now I had to pay the debt.
A lot of bills.
A lot of bills. So I actually was at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, and I was presenting a paper at an international congress of endocrinology. And a gentleman asked me a question in very broken English, but very German. And I answered in German. And he asked me afterwards, would I have a cup of coffee with him? And by the time I left having the cup of coffee, I had my first job at $22,500, and it was like I died and went to heaven.
And who was this for?
This was for a German company called Boehringer Mannheim, and it was located in Mannheim and Tutzing, and it was setting up satellite offices at 219 East 43rd Street in New York City.
Okay, and is it right that after there you did spend some time at Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer?
I spent some time after that. I was recruited from there to Pfizer in corporate development, and then I was recruited by Union Carbide to go overseas and start up a subsidiary in Japan, which I already spoke Japanese, which was good. Then I came back, worked for J&J, and then on to Merck, and then
Brown and Williamson.
Brown and Williamson.
Now, Brown and Williamson is a Louisville-based tobacco company, a subsidiary of a British concern, BAT?
Yeah, it's a complicated structure, and it's mainly constructed for legal issues. The parent company today, I think, because they keep on changing names, is British American Tobacco PLC. British American Tobacco PLC held ownership in what they call BATUS, British American Tobacco US, which owns Saks Fifth Avenue, Ivy, Marshall Fields, Brown Williamson Tobacco, and a host of other companies, but it was the holding company, and they were essentially the management, the management company for Brown and Williamson. And Brown and Williamson was headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky, even though there was a management structure in place for reporting. Essentially, B&W reported directly to the chairman of the board of BAT Industries, or BAT PLC.
And what did you do at Brown and Williamson?
I was hired specifically as the head of research and development environmental, and to actually use my medical background to address a product they knew was addictive and when used as intended killed. And then, so that was number one, which was really a very large hook. Because I had developed pharmaceuticals and pregnancy tests and laboratory controls and instruments for doing automatic bacteriological assessment. So this was something that really I thought was very sociological and medically relevant.
And what year was that you got?
That was it. I started interviewing them in April 1988. Mm-hmm. I finally made up my mind in November of '88. My salary was mid six figures. I got to move my family from New York City area to Louisville, Kentucky, where my daughter's grandparents lived, and so when I did the calculus of should I do this and shouldn't I, and I would say I had my colleagues in the medical industry really were they were pretty well split down the line, but I was doing something I believe had high medical relevance and could save lives, and so that was a challenge. I got healthcare benefits.
Now, just so we're clear, why did you think that what you were doing there would save lives?
Well, cigarettes take 440,000 lives in this country each year that are 100% preventable. It starts with children age roughly 12 to 13, and as young as 8. It manifests itself some 14, 15 years later in some form of illness associated with either the tar or the addictive nicotine. Could you change the carbon monoxide? Could you change some of the nail polish remover or the formaldehyde embalming fluid? Or could you change these chemicals that were known toxicants and remove them, some of it, by changing the format of the cigarette? That is, have a cigarette that no longer was burning or combusting, but it's something that was heated, or something that had catalytic conversion, or something that had what we call affinity capacity to remove a certain component without changing it. And that was exciting to me, and I had many ideas. And I would say during the process of the interviews, which were extensive and very probing on my part as well as their part, I wanted to make sure I understood what they understood, and they clearly understood nicotine was addictive. They clearly understood that that was their business, and they understood that tar was the big problem. They also wanted me to take what was considered an archaic organization and contemporize it. It was a very empirically based organization that they wanted me to make more scientific. Average age was about 45, 46. There were very little PhDs. The laboratory is more like, I It's like a high school laboratory, not what I would call state of the art. So I had a number of areas, but the thing that really kind of turned me on was that I would be able to make a safer cigarette. I would be able to spend enormous amount of capital money building a science-based organization, institution, hire the people, pay exceptionally well, healthcare benefits, and then family close to family.
And what turned you off? You left in 1993.
I was fired, to be very honest. What turned me off was probably 3 months into the job where I was told by lawyers that the science that I understood from the Surgeon General's report, what I had learned in medical school and medical journals, was all defeatable in the court of law. And there were two fundamental tenets that they asked me to express both publicly and privately. Was one, that nicotine wasn't addictive, or it was addictive, it no longer would be free choice, and that was a basic defense. And the second is there was no proven causality between smoking and illness. Well, those are quite contradictory to at least my discussions with the senior management. I mean senior management of BAT, Battis, and Brown and Williamson.
In other words, there was a kind of a conspiracy of silence that we know this is all true. In our private conversations, we'll fess up to it. But when we go public, we're going to say that none of this is provable as a matter of law.
You got it. And that was exactly the posture they took in the courts until the documents in 1993 made their way into public domain, which changed the way the tobacco industry operates.
Okay, well, tell me how the exposure of all of this happened.
How the exposure? Well, it was a gradual process. I would say people who think this happened as an epiphany, it doesn't. It was, I saw how lawyers changed documents. I saw how lawyers misuse their privilege. I saw people exporting tobacco seed outside the country that was illegal. I saw many things that bothered me, but I guess the straw that broke the camel's back was when a particular...
So to speak, yes.
Was a additive that had been used, and there are about 600 additives that are added to cigarettes to make them easier to smoke and enhance the potency of nicotine. I got what's called a pre-draft report of a National Toxicology Program report, which I maintained my medical contacts while I was there, so I got to read it. And it basically said one of the additives that was being used by the company and had been banned in 1954 by the Food and Drug Administration continued to be used. And I said, with this incremental knowledge that this is a lung-specific carcinogen, it needs to come out right away. I went to the president with it after I had the data validated by a professional toxicologist. He basically told me to go back to the laboratory, find the substitute, that he wasn't going to take it out. It would affect sales. It was his decision, not my decision. And that's kind of when I wrote the fateful memo. And that's what got me fired for poor communication.
Poor communication. It was too clear what you wrote.
Yeah, it was. I believe it violated the categorical imperative. I mean, it put people in more harm's way than the product by itself. And I thought there was a duty, a moral duty, to take it out.
And B&W sued you.
B&W sued me. B&W sued me for allegedly violating my contract for telling somebody my salary. As I was going through the recruiting process, they used that as a ploy, as a instrument to intimidate. I think that because what they did is they cut my health care benefits off, and they cut off my salary severance package. The salary was not so much of an issue with me, it was being able to protect the health of my daughter. And
was she threatened?
She was threatened later on, and that's a separate little entity of it, but taking her health care benefits away threatened her health. I mean, and they offered me this draconian agreement that basically said anytime I was asked anything about tobacco, or before I could say anything, I'd have to tell them, and they had the right to have lawyers present, and I signed it.
And because you were under such financial duress?
I mean, part of it was financial duress. I mean, I was out of a $500,000 job, but I wasn't broke, for sure. Nor did I feel that I would not be able to get another job back at where it came from, and that's the first time in my career I ever became a bridesmaid. And I just thought there was a lot of poisoning of the well, even though I had a written agreement that they would provide positive references because my performance appraisals while at the company were outstanding. And I got all the bonuses and benefits, et cetera, et cetera.
So how did it fall apart? You had this deal. What happened?
Well, a number of things happened. I got involved with CBS 60 Minutes and reviewing documents that they received from an anonymous source. The names of the people that were on the documents were people I had been across from at meetings. They basically said they couldn't develop a cigarette that did not cause fires. They had it in the hand in 1986, and in 1993 they're saying it was an impossibility, and that would have saved 1,200 lives a year, and enormous impact on lost property caused by fires generated exclusively by cigarettes. And it just bothered me that they would shelve it. They would call it Hamlet, to burn or not to burn. And that sort of started me in the process. Do I really want to keep quiet? I was still concerned about my family. The hearings went on in April 1994. I watched my boss raise his right hand and promise to tell the truth. He lied. He said nicotine wasn't addictive, that cigarette smoking was no more dangerous than Twinkies. I knew that was incorrect. At that time, I realized that if I didn't do something, I would be just as guilty as he was. I would be guilty as a bystanderism. I started working covertly with the FDA. My code name was Research, and I basically took the FDA through the whole process of cigarette design, and I took the commissioner through every aspect of.
This would be Dr. David Kessler?
This was Dr. David Kessler, and he promised that if I, my deal was I would only work with him, and my name would be protected, and I wouldn't sign any logs. I'd travel under assumed names, and they honored that promise. I must say, him and Jack Mitchell. When I reported to the company, the first time I was contacted by Congressman Waxman was the first time, and I was asked, would I testify? If we got the proper instrument, would you testify? And I said, yes, I would. I'd be more than happy, but I need an instrument because I had this onerous draconian type agreement that I've signed. Get me a subpoena, and I'll be there in a heartbeat. And it didn't happen right away. There were conversations going back and forth, and I decided to tell the company that I'd been contacted, and that's when the 2 death threats came to my children, not to me. And that shook me a little bit.
As it would any parent.
Yeah, I mean, it really shook me, and I don't have a problem taking responsibility for my actions, but I didn't want my children hurt for actions I was taking. And then I got involved in the ABC Philip Morris $10 billion lawsuit, and I saw how Philip Morris operated. And when August 5th, 1995 rolled around, I had already reviewed many documents that I was never able to review while I was in the company, called the cigarette papers. And
were these documents that were forthcoming in the suit by the state's attorneys general?
Unfortunately not. They were documents that were stolen by a paralegal by the name of Merrill Williams. And that was problematic, but the documents were the smoking guns. And they were more than smoking guns. They made their way to a professor of cardiology at UC San Francisco. He published them in JAMA. JAMA asked me to review the documents for authenticity.
The Journal of American Medical Association.
Yeah, sorry. Journal of American Medical Association. And I couldn't believe what I read. And on August 5th, 1995, I decided that I was no longer going to hold my tongue. And I was going to tell people exactly what I knew, what I saw went on, why I thought Mr. Sandiford lied, and some of the goings-on that were in the company about boosting nicotine with ammonia and making it more addictive, targeting children. I can go down the litany of allegations, I guess they're called, that have been very much validated. I was never fortunate enough to bring the documents with me that I had, or would I have.
So is that when you were sued?
I was sued when my name became known. My first suit was they alleged that I violated my secrecy agreement, my fiduciary responsibility as an officer, by telling somebody my salary.
Right.
That was trumped up.
Right.
And for that, they extorted from me what I would consider the most draconian
gag order, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I broke it. I consciously broke it because I felt that there was no contract or agreement that could prevent me ever from protecting the public health and safety. And if so, I had a duty to do it, and I did it.
And they sued you again, and part of the settlement in the suit by the state's attorney general was that they would drop the charges against you as well. Was that it?
They sued me in, October of 1995. I was freed from that lawsuit after extended depositions and bodyguards and being followed, and the 800-pound gorilla that I mentioned on June 20th, 1997 at 6 p.m. at the A&A Hotel over on 24th and M Street.
Here in D.C.
D.C.
Any regrets about having done this?
No. No, it was an amazing alignment of stars. There was an amazing alignment or stew or chemistry that happened. The timing was perfect. I got support from journalists. The students I was teaching helped me. The principal, the teachers rallied around me. There was times that I felt uncomfortable. I wasn't sure. Nobody feels exactly comfortable when you have a bodyguard and people opening your mail and starting your car because of the truth. That did not make me feel very secure. In the end, was it the right thing to do? Yes. Was it morally right? Yes. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. A New York minute.
Well, we have to thank Dr. Jeffrey Wigand for his courage and willingness to do what's in the public interest and within the scope of his moral conscience. He did the right thing, and we're all better for it. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Whistle Where You Work.
I started out as an assistant prosecutor, and in those days, back in the late 70s, in the Kansas City prosecutor's office, there weren't very many that looked like me. In fact, for a period of time, there was the only one that looked like me. It was a very male-dominated office, and unfortunately, because of that, I found myself with really hard cases. sometimes, cases that were very difficult to make. And many of them were not very glamorous. They were things like food stamp fraud and, burglaries and things that, especially at the beginning, before I kind of earned my keep, they were really throwing me what was known around the office as the dogs. And during that period of time, I began to respect the power of a good witness, a factual witness, the power of someone who was there and who saw what happened and could convey it with courage. I saw both kinds. I saw witnesses that refused to say anything because they were worried about themselves, and I saw witnesses that were able to step across the line and say, I'm going to talk about this because it's for the greater good. And the most heartbreaking thing is my career progressed. I became the boss of that office in the 90s. And time after time, we would have the most horrific violent crimes that we could not move forward on because we couldn't find that factual witness that was willing to be brave and courageous and step up. Then I moved on to the auditor's office. And we were able to do some really bang-up audits. I mean, some stuff that, with not only was there smoking guns, there were bonfires. And invariably, every time we did one of these audits that was so strong, it could always be traced back to a whistleblower. Someone who was a fact witness, who was quote-unquote at the scene of the crime, and who was willing to step across that line, be courageous, and speak out publicly for the greater good. And Missouri, believe me, you think the federal law for whistleblowers is bad. I mean, it is a horrible law for whistleblowers in Missouri. In fact, the only protection whistleblowers have in Missouri was to talk to the state auditor's office. Woo-hoo for me. Not good for the rest of the government. But we were able to, I think, do some cutting-edge audit work because of that little thread of protection that whistleblowers had in the state auditor's office where we could protect them. So you understand why I came here with a penchant for protecting whistleblowers.